Hi everyone, and welcome to another video in the series on attacks against ADCS. In this video, we're going to learn about a super cool attack chain in which we combine two different attacks we've learned into one large attack, where we request a certificate in the name of the administrator and use it to request a TGT on their behalf, thereby taking full control over the domain. So our scenario is as follows. We're performing a resilience test, conducting an internal audit for a company called ITSAFE. We only have a regular domain user with no special privileges. We tried all the privilege escalation techniques, but nothing worked, so we decided to shift our focus toward ADCS. After enumeration, we discovered that there's one template vulnerable to the ECS1 attack, but it can only be enrolled by members of the domain admins group or the domain computers group. The first solution that came to mind was to simply create a new computer account and use it, but after checking, we saw that the domain policy doesn't allow regular users to create computer accounts. So what can we do? After some thought and research, we found that there is still a way to authenticate as a computer user against ADCS, and it involves using the CNTLM Relay attack we previously learned. Now, let's see how we'll do it. We can use a vulnerability called printer bug. It exploits the MSRPRN protocol, or in its full name, Microsoft Print System Remote Protocol, which is a protocol used for managing printers and print requests to network printers. What we can do is use printer bug to ask a specific machine in the domain to print something on another server, and we'll direct it to connect to a malicious server that we set up in the network. Because network printers require authentication via NetNTLM, we'll be able to perform an NTLM relay on the NetNTLM we receive to the domain controller, or more specifically, to the ADCS web enrollment, which is an IIS server of the ADCS that allows requesting certificates via HTTP. Now, once we execute the printer bug attack, the NetNTLM hash of the computer account we targeted, for example, if we direct the attack to the PC01 computer, the NetNTLM hash that arrives at our server will be for PC01 $. Then, once we receive its NetNTLM, we'll relay it to the ADCS web server and authenticate as the computer account, thereby requesting enrollment for a certificate. We'll also be able to request the certificate in the name of any domain user we choose, including the domain's administrator, and in this way escalate our privileges from a regular domain user with no special permissions to domain admin. All we need for the attack is an attack machine, such as Kali Linux, on the same network and a legitimate domain user. So let's begin. The first thing we want to do is set up the malicious server, and for that, we'll use the NTLM Relay X tool we've already used in the video series on the NTLM Relay attack. We'll make a few changes to the command to tailor it to this attack, and the updated command will look like this. Now let's understand the command. We'll use the -T flag to specify the target to which we'll relay the NetNTLM auth when we receive it. We want to relay it to the ADCS web server, whose URL is this, where DC01 ITSAFE local is the FQDN of the domain controller, and the endpoint path is this. Next, we'll add the SMB to support flag so that our malicious server supports SMB-v2 authentication requests. Then we'll use the ADCS flag to indicate to the tool that we are relaying to an ADCS server, so it needs to build the request accordingly. The next flag is template, because once we authenticate via NetNTLM, we want to request certificate creation using a template to which the user has enrollment access. In our case, we found a template named ECS1 that is vulnerable. Finally, we'll use the alt name flag to specify the SAN we want to include in the certificate so that the certificate is also valid for the user listed in the SAN. In our case, we'll request it for the domain administrator. So let's run the command and see if the server starts successfully. Now we see that the server is running and waiting for connections, and now comes the next part of the attack. Now we need to trigger a NetNTLM connection using the printer bug, and we'll download the following Python script. And now we can execute the printer bug attack with the following command. Let's understand the command. We use the domain user Kisharma to authenticate against PC01 and ask it to perform a print operation to a remote server. Then, we specify the IP address of the computer we want it to connect to. In our case, the PC01 computer has IP address 192.168.174.131, and finally, we specify the IP address of our malicious server, which is our Kali Linux machine, with IP 192.168.174.128. So let's run the command and see what we get in return. We see that the tool returned an ambiguous response on whether the attack succeeded, but if we look at our CNTLM Relay X output, we'll see that a connection occurred. We see that the connection from user PC01 as a result of the relay succeeded. We see that the certificate request succeeded and the tool already exported it to a PFX file. Additionally, it informs us that the alt name we specified succeeded, meaning the certificate is also valid for the administrator. Now, we can take the PFX file and use it to obtain the administrator's TGT. There are now two ways we can do this. The first is the method we already know, using the certipy tool as we did in the previous videos, and for that, we can run the following command. We'll use the auth command of certipy to request authentication against the domain using the certificate we obtained. Then, we'll specify the PFX flag to indicate the PFX file that contains the certificate we obtained via CNTLM Relay. In our example, it's named PC01$PFX. Next, we'll use the -username flag to indicate the user we want to authenticate as. Since we have a certificate that can also authenticate as the administrator, that's exactly what we'll do. Then we'll specify the domain flag to indicate which domain we want to send authentication requests to. In our case, it's our example domain ITSAFE local. Finally, we'll use the DCIP flag to specify the IP address of the domain controller running the KDC, which in our case is 192.168.174.130. So let's run the command and see if we can authenticate. We see that we obtained the administrator's TGT and it is saved in a C cache file. Additionally, the tool used the TGT to retrieve the CNTLM hash of the administrator. But right now we want to use only the TGT, and now we can save it in the KRB5CC name environment variable as we know. Now, let's try to connect using wmi-exec to the domain controller as the administrator with the command we know. We see that we successfully connected as administrator to DC01, and thus we escalated our privileges from a simple domain user with no privileges to domain admin by chaining together multiple different attacks. Now before we finish, we'll learn another way to use the PFX file to obtain a TGT. For example, in a situation where for some reason we can't use the TGT via our Kali Linux, we can use a Windows machine to obtain the TGT and use it. Now of course we'll need a Windows machine that's joined to the domain, and we'll need the Rubius tool. For this example, we'll connect to the PC02 machine using the lapsed password we found in previous videos. But before connecting, if we convert the PFX file to base 64, we can input it into Rubius without transferring the file, which is a huge advantage, and we can do that with this command. Now we'll see we got a very long base 64 string, so we'll copy it and now connect to PC02 using xfreeRDP. Now that we're connected and have transferred Rubius to the machine, we can request the TGT with this command. Let's understand the command. As we know, we use the ask TGT command of Rubius and add the /user flag to specify the user we want to request the TGT for, in our case, the domain administrator. Then we specify the /domain flag to tell Rubius which domain to send the request to. In our case, the example domain ITSAFE local. Then we specify the /AES256 flag to request that the TGT be encrypted with AES256, which is typically the algorithm the KDC uses. Next, we use the /getCredential flag to indicate to the tool that we're not providing a password, but that the authentication credentials, the certificate, will be provided in a file, and we'll also include the /certificate flag to specify the certificate in either file or base 64 format as we've converted it. Finally, we use the /PTT flag to inject the TGT into memory so we can use it. So let's run the command and see if we can obtain the TGT. We see that we successfully obtained the TGT. Now, if we run the command klist, we'll see it is stored in memory. We see that we have a cached ticket for the administrator and it's valid. Now let's try to access the classified SMB folder $. We see we have access to the folder. Now let's try to get a shell via PS remote as we know. Excellent. we see we've gotten a shell on the domain controller as the domain's administrator, and so we've gained full control over the domain. So let's summarize what we did in this video. At the beginning of the video, we discussed a scenario where we could combine multiple attacks to obtain a certificate. We stole the CNTLM hash of a computer user and relayed it to the ADCS server, thereby authenticating as the computer account. Then we requested a certificate using a vulnerable template and requested that the certificate be for the domain administrator. In this way, we escalated our privileges from a completely regular user to domain admin. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.